The weight of my father's crown, even before it truly settled upon my brow, was a tangible thing. Pepin, a man of shrewdness and courage, had laid a mighty foundation, not just of land and loyalties, but of a sacred understanding with the Bishop of Rome. That bond, between Frankish might and holy sanction, was the true inheritance. My ambition, however, was never merely to maintain what he had built, but to expand it, to forge something new from the fragmented chaos that followed Rome's decline, a unified Christian empire under a single unwavering will, my own. Yet before that grand vision could truly take shape, there was the constant gnawing presence of my brother Charlemagne. From the moment Pepin divided the kingdom, our shared patrimony became a source of bitter contention. He was more than a brother, he was a rival, a shadow cast across my path, a persistent obstacle to the singular authority I knew was my destiny. Every decision, every alliance, every campaign was viewed through the lens of competition. The tension, thick as winter fog, hung between our courts. When his messenger arrived with news of his death, a sudden illness they claimed, I admit a profound, almost unholy sense of relief washed over me. The path, once bifurcated, was now clear. With Charlemagne gone, the way lay open for the true work. My relationship with the Church, specifically with Pope Leo III, became the cornerstone of my power. I understood the symbiosis. I was God's chosen protector, the sword and shield of Christendom, pouring Frankish gold and might into the Church's coffers, defending its lands from Lombard threats and its doctrines from heresies. In return, the Pope bestowed upon me an unparalleled legitimacy, not merely as a king, but as something far greater. That holy sanction allowed me to prosecute my wars not just as conquests, but as crusades, fulfilling a divine mandate. Nowhere was this more evident than in my campaigns against the Saxons. They were pagans, defiant, clinging stubbornly to their ancient gods and customs. A festering wound on the body of Europe, preventing the unity I craved. For 3 decades I drove my armies into their forests and plains, a relentless force. They called it brutality. I called it necessity. The sword and the cross, marching hand in hand. If forced conversions were required to bring order and salvation, then so be it. Weakness was a luxury I could not afford in myself, nor tolerate in others. Einhard might speak of my imposing stature and intellectual curiosity. But beneath that, I was a man who understood the sharp edge of power. My curiosity extended beyond the battlefield. I devoured knowledge, mastering Latin, dabbling in Greek, sponsoring scholars from across the continent. I encouraged my children's education, delighting in their intellectual growth. My sons, of course, were groomed for rule, but my daughters, my daughters. I loved them fiercely. Yet I forbade them from marrying during my lifetime. Was it possessiveness, as some whispered? Perhaps, but it was also control. No foreign prince would use my daughters to weave alliances that could undermine my authority. My numerous wives and mistresses served their purpose, producing heirs, solidifying political ties. But my heart, though full of paternal affection, remained singularly focused on the grand architecture of my empire. And my body? I reveled in the hunt, in the saddle, in the swim, indulging in great roasted meats, to the utter despair of the paltry physicians I very nearly hated, whose ridiculous advice I invariably ignored. My vision was not merely one of conquest, but of civilization. The Carolingian Renaissance, as some would call it, was my attempt to rekindle the flame of learning, to stamp out ignorance, to standardize laws and weights and measures, to bring order to every facet of life. I sought to build not just a kingdom but a true Christian empire, a successor to Rome, yet infused with the vigor and faith of the Franks. It was a monumental task, demanding a restless spirit, a brilliant mind, and a will as unyielding as the rock of the Alps. The name they would eventually bestow upon me, Charles the Great, was not merely a title, it was a testament to a life lived in relentless pursuit of that singular magnificent destiny. The weight of my father's crown, even before it truly settled upon my brow, was a tangible thing. Pepin, a man of shrewdness and courage, had laid a mighty foundation, not just of land and loyalties, but of a sacred understanding with the Bishop of Rome. That bond, between Frankish might and holy sanction, was the true inheritance. I can still recall the scent of the palace halls in my youth, hushed yet buzzing with the quiet hum of power. My father, Pepin, moved through it with an effortless authority, his eyes always calculating, his hand always steady. He molded me, not just with words, but with the silent example of a man who seized his destiny with the blessing of God's vicar. My ambition, however, was never merely to maintain what he had built, but to expand it, to forge something new from the fragmented chaos that followed Rome's decline, a unified Christian empire under a single unwavering will, my own. Yet before that grand vision could truly take shape, there was the constant gnawing presence of my brother Charlemagne. From the moment Pepin divided the kingdom, our shared patrimony became a source of bitter contention. He was more than a brother, he was a rival, a shadow cast across my path, a persistent obstacle to the singular authority I knew was my destiny. The division of the kingdom was a wound that refused to heal. I remember the endless veiled negotiations, the slights delivered through envoys, the feigned cordiality that barely masked our mutual suspicion. He courted Aquitaine, seeking to isolate me, to diminish my reach. Each rumor of his movements, each minor rebellion within his territories, was a test of my patience, a constant reminder of the fractured realm. His very existence was a challenge to my singular purpose. Every decision, every alliance, every campaign was viewed through the lens of competition. The tension, thick as winter fog, hung between our courts. When his messenger arrived with news of his death, a sudden illness they claimed, I admit a profound, almost unholy sense of relief washed over me. The path, once bifurcated, was now clear. With Charlemagne gone, the way lay open for the true work. My relationship with the Church, specifically with Pope Leo III, became the cornerstone of my power. I understood the symbiosis. I was God's chosen protector, the sword and shield of Christendom, pouring Frankish gold and might into the Church's coffers, defending its lands from Lombard threats and its doctrines from heresies. In return, the Pope bestowed upon me an unparalleled legitimacy, not merely as a king, but as something far greater. That holy sanction allowed me to prosecute my wars not just as conquests, but as crusades, fulfilling a divine mandate. Then came that fateful Christmas morn in Rome, the year of our Lord 800. I had knelt before the altar of St. Peter's, ostensibly for prayer, when Leo, with a swiftness that startled even me, placed the golden diadem upon my head. The roar of the people, the acclamations of Augustus, Emperor of the Romans, it was deafening. I feigned displeasure later for show, but in truth, it was the culmination, the divine affirmation of all I had striven for. No longer merely king of the Franks, but Caesar, the protector of the true faith, the inheritor of a legacy far grander than any earthly crown. It was not a gift, but a recognition of a truth I had always known in my soul, that I was destined to restore order to a fragmented world. Nowhere was this more evident than in my campaigns against the Saxons. They were pagans, defiant, clinging stubbornly to their ancient gods and customs, a festering wound on the body of Europe, preventing the unity I craved. For 3 decades I drove my armies into their forests and plains, a relentless force. They called it brutality, I called it necessity, the sword and the cross, marching hand in hand. If forced conversions were required to bring order and salvation, then so be it. Weakness was a luxury I could not afford in myself, nor tolerate in others. Einhard might speak of my imposing stature and intellectual curiosity, but beneath that, I was a man who understood the sharp edge of power. My curiosity extended beyond the battlefield. I devoured knowledge, mastering Latin, dabbling in Greek, sponsoring scholars from across the continent. I encouraged my children's education, delighting in their intellectual growth. My sons, of course, were groomed for rule, but my daughters, my daughters. I loved them fiercely, yet I forbade them from marrying during my lifetime. Was it possessiveness, as some whispered? Perhaps, but it was also control. No foreign prince would use my daughters to weave alliances that could undermine my authority. My numerous wives and mistresses served their purpose, producing heirs, solidifying political ties, but my heart, though full of paternal affection, remained singularly focused on the grand architecture of my empire. And my body? I reveled in the hunt, in the saddle, in the swim, indulging in great roasted meats. To the utter despair of the paltry physicians I very nearly hated, whose ridiculous advice I invariably ignored. My vision was not merely one of conquest, but of civilization. The Carolingian Renaissance, as some would call it, was my attempt to rekindle the flame of learning, to stamp out ignorance, to standardize laws and weights and measures, to bring order to every facet of life. I sought to build not just a kingdom, but a true Christian empire, a successor to Rome, yet infused with the vigor and faith of the Franks. It was a monumental task, demanding a restless spirit, a brilliant mind, and a will as unyielding as the rock of the Alps. The name they would eventually bestow upon me, Charles the Great, was not merely a title, it was a testament to a life lived in relentless pursuit of that singular magnificent destiny. The acclamations of Augustus, Emperor of the Romans, still echoed in the hallowed halls of St. Peter's, a resonance that settled deep in my bones. It was a recognition, yes, but also a burden, a confirmation that the world now looked to me, not merely as a Frankish king, but as the successor to a grandeur lost, now through God's grace rekindled. The East, ensconced in Byzantium, might sneer at this barbarian emperor, but their claim was based on a fading legacy, ours on a living, breathing Christian destiny forged anew. My coronation was not an end, but a beginning, a mandate to ensure that the order I had brought with the sword would be cemented by law, by faith, and by the rigorous pursuit of knowledge. The Carolingian Renaissance, as some scholars, like my diligent Einhard, would later term it, was never a mere indulgence. It was a vital pillar of this new empire. Ignorance was a weakness, a breeding ground for heresy and disunity. My court became a beacon, drawing the brightest minds from across Europe, Irish monks, Anglo-Saxon scholars, Italian grammarians. We copied ancient texts, standardized scripture, refined Latin, and established schools within cathedrals and monasteries. I myself always found time amidst the rigors of governance and war to study, to converse with these learned men, even to attempt the art of writing, though my fingers, more accustomed to the sword, proved clumsy with the pen. It was about creating a shared culture, a literate clergy, and an educated administration, capable of running a realm stretching from the Ebro to the Elbe. This was not merely about power, but about the very soul of Europe. To manage such an expanse, mere conquest was insufficient. I forged a system of governance as robust as my armies. My missi dominici, royal envoys, rode across the land, ensuring my justice was administered, my decrees obeyed, my counts and bishops kept honest. Law was codified, weights and measures standardized, every detail, no matter how small, brought under the unifying hand of the emperor. The Pax Augusta I sought to re-establish, not through a decadent imperium but through a Christian one, built on faith, order, and the relentless application of clear authority. My campaigns against the Saxons, though prolonged and bloody, were ultimately about this same principle, bringing light and order to the darkness of pagan resistance. Even if that light had to be kindled by fire and steel, they, like all unruly elements, would bend or break. As the years advanced, so too did my focus shift, though my energy never waned. My children remained a profound source of joy and, at times, a quiet sorrow. My sons, Pepin and Charles the Younger, strong lads groomed for rule, were taken from me too soon, leaving only Louis to bear the weight of the imperial mantle after my time. This was a tragedy that gnawed at me, a reminder of the fragility of even the grandest designs. My daughters, however, continued to reside within my court, unmarried, their youthful beauty preserved, their futures unentangled by alliances that could diminish my own control. Call it paternal affection, call it calculated strategy, for me, they were simply protected, cherished pieces of my world. And as for my own physical well-being, the paltry physicians who fretted over my beloved roasted meats and my vigorous outdoor pursuits remained a source of endless amusement and utter disregard. Their cures were often worse than the ailments, and I found far more solace in a hearty hunt and a well-cooked haunch than in their bitter concoctions. The empire I had forged not through a single swift stroke, but through decades of unyielding will and tireless effort, was my testament. From a divided inheritance I had built a realm that stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube, from the North Sea to beyond the Tiber, a beacon of Christian civilization in a world still emerging from shadows. Einhard, my faithful chronicler, would later tell my story, perhaps with a touch more reverence than I truly deserved, but he understood the essence that I was a man driven by a singular purpose, to restore the grandeur of Rome, not in name alone but in spirit, under the banner of Christ. The name Charles the Great was bestowed upon me by others, but it merely acknowledged the truth I had lived, that I was destined to shape the very fabric of Europe, to lay the foundation for a future beyond the immediate reign of any king, or even any emperor. In the heart of St. Peter's Basilica, on that momentous day of December 25, 800 AD, the weight of 1,000 years of history settled upon my shoulders. The golden crown, placed upon my head by the hands of Pope Leo III, signified more than just a title. It was a mandate, a responsibility to shape the destiny of Europe. As I stood there surrounded by the echoes of the past and the hopes of the future, I knew that this was not merely a personal triumph, but a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Franks. From the ashes of a divided inheritance, we had risen, forging a new empire that would stretch across the continent, a beacon of light in a world still emerging from the shadows of barbarism. But the task before me was daunting. To maintain the order I had brought with the sword, I needed to ensure that the fabric of my realm was woven not just with iron and steel, but with the threads of law, faith and learning. The Carolingian Renaissance, as it would later be called, was born not out of vanity, but out of necessity. Ignorance was a weakness, a breeding ground for discord and rebellion. By fostering education and culture, I sought to create a shared identity, a literate clergy, and an administration capable of running a realm that spanned from the Ebro to the Elbe. To govern such an expanse, mere conquest was insufficient. I forged a system of governance as robust as my armies. My missi dominici, royal envoys, rode across the land, ensuring my justice was administered, my decrees obeyed, my counts and bishops kept honest. Law was codified, weights and measures standardized, every detail, no matter how small, brought under the unifying hand of the emperor. Yet my campaigns against the Saxons, though necessary, were a bitter reminder of the fragility of even the grandest designs. Their resistance to my Christianizing mission was a challenge that I met with relentless force, for I believed that their pagan darkness must be illuminated by the light of faith, even if that light had to be kindled by fire and steel. As the years advanced, so too did my focus shift. My children remained a profound source of joy and, at times, a quiet sorrow. My sons, Pepin and Charles the younger, strong lads, groomed for rule, were taken from me too soon, leaving only Louis to bear the weight of the imperial mantle after my time. This was a tragedy that gnawed at me, a reminder of the fragility of even the grandest designs. My daughters, however, continued to reside within my court, unmarried, their youthful beauty preserved, their futures unentangled by alliances that could diminish my own control. Call it paternal affection, call it calculated strategy. For me, they were simply protected, cherished pieces of my world. And as for my own physical well-being, the paltry physicians who fretted over my beloved roasted meats, and my vigorous outdoor pursuits, remained a source of endless amusement and utter disregard. Their cures were often worse than the ailments, and I found far more solace in a hearty hunt and a well-cooked haunch than in their bitter concoctions. The empire I had forged, not through a single swift stroke, but through decades of unyielding will and tireless effort, was my testament. From a divided inheritance, I had built a realm that stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube, from the North Sea to beyond the Tiber, a beacon of Christian civilization, in a world still emerging from shadows. Einhard, my faithful chronicler, would later tell my story, perhaps with a touch more reverence than I truly deserved, but he understood the essence, that I was a man driven by a singular purpose, to restore the grandeur of Rome, not in name alone, but in spirit, under the banner of Christ. The name Charles the Great was bestowed upon me by others, but it merely acknowledged the truth I had lived, that I was destined to shape the very fabric of Europe, to lay the foundation for a future beyond the immediate reign of any king, or even any emperor. 8013. The autumn winds carried a chill that seeped into my bones, a chill deeper than any winter. Time, that relentless conqueror, was at last claiming its tribute. My hair, once ruddy and vibrant, was now a thin silver crown, and my once straight back bore the slight curve of decades spent in the saddle and poring over maps. But my mind remained sharp, my will unbent. The empire, though vast and seemingly unshakable, required a steady hand to guide it into the future. And I, Charlemagne, would ensure that transition was as seamless as my army's marches across the Rhine. The memory of my youth, of the bitter rivalry with Charlemagne, still gnawed at times. Shared inheritances bred strife, weakened kingdoms. My own sons, Charles the Younger and Pepin, so promising, had been taken from me too soon, a cruel twist of fate that left only Louis. He was a pious man, a scholar, perhaps not the warrior I had been, but he possessed a quiet strength, a deep reverence for the order I had established. And so, in the great hall at Aachen, before an assembly of my most trusted counts and bishops, I made the declaration: my son Louis would be crowned co-emperor. It was not Pope Leo III who placed the circlet upon his head this time, but I, Charlemagne, the Emperor of the West, demonstrating that my authority, not merely the Church's, bestowed this power. The gold of the crown glinted, a promise for the realm's continued stability, a preventative measure against the chaos I had spent a lifetime quelling. My daughters, still blooming within these walls, were, as they ever were, bright stars in my firmament, their fates guarded fiercely, unburdened by marital chains. They brought laughter and music to my austere court, their presence a quiet counterpoint to the thrum of governance and war. And the physicians, those purveyors of bitter tinctures and ill-advised diets, still clucked and fretted, their words falling on deaf ears as I called for another platter of roasted boar, or ignored their pleas to rest. My body, I knew, was a vessel of the Lord's will, and it would serve me until it could serve no more, regardless of their concoctions. The Saxons, though outwardly subdued, remained a dark, persistent thread in the tapestry of my thoughts. Generations had been spent on their forced conversion, the sword a relentless instrument of the cross. Peace had been forged, but at a terrible human cost, a testament to the harsh necessities of building a Christian empire from pagan lands. As the winter of 813 deepened into the new year, the fever came, a thief in the night, stealing the vigor I had so long taken for granted. My body, once an obedient servant to my will, now rebelled with shivers and aches. Still, I resisted the doctors, their frantic ministrations only serving to annoy me. I knew my own constitution better than any of them, but even my iron will could not halt the relentless march of time and infirmity. On January 28, 814, in the palace at Aachen, the breath that had drawn empires, fostered learning, and waged ceaseless war, finally stilled. The grand hall, so often filled with booming commands and the clamor of court, was hushed. The empire I had forged, not through a single swift stroke, but through decades of unyielding will and tireless effort, was my testament. My faithful chronicler Einhard would commit my deeds to parchment, ensuring my name, Charles the Great, would echo through the ages, a symbol of what one man blessed by God and driven by unwavering purpose could achieve. The shadows lengthened, and the empire, my life's work, stretched out beyond the windows, a silent testament to a destiny fulfilled. I had laid the foundation, not just for a reign, but for an idea, a united Christian Europe. And now my work was done.